Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Onondaga County Syracuse Human Rights Commission's public meeting on the I-81 project. My name is Montanette Murphy, and I am the Executive Director of the Human Rights Commission for Onondaga County. Welcome again. With me today is Chief Diversity Officer for Onondaga County, Monica Williams, Human Rights Commission Chair, Rashida Caldwell, and also with us is Project Counsel for the New York Civil Liberties Union and Human Rights Commissioner and Attorney Lanessa Chaplin. Also with me today is a host of Human Rights Commissioners. I'd like to recognize Alameen Muhammad, John Rushing, Nidecia Hernandez, and I've mentioned Rashida Caldwell. At this time, I'd like to recognize any state and locally elected officials who are with us today. If you could please raise your hand or wave or have words. All right, I see Legislator Mary Kuhn. And also Dr. Peggy Chase is with us today, Legislator Chase. The purpose of today's meeting is to state the facts about the I-81 project. This is going to be a listening session for our community, or for us, I'm sorry. We are taking this opportunity, the Human Rights Commissioners, to listen to the community about their concerns with I-81. We're here to state the facts of this project. What is the project, the history of the project, and what are the facts? A few rules before we get started. We're going to ask that everyone be respectful of others. Anyone who's speaking or not speaking, we just ask that you be respectful of others. Each person will have 2 minutes, exactly 2 minutes to comment or to make statements. If you have a question, you'll need to raise your hand, or you can put information in the chat box. You can communicate with us via chat. We will not be able to answer all the questions today, but we will have a transcript of today's public hearing, and we'll go over those questions again and follow up with individuals who have questions about the I-81 project. Also, I want to invite everyone to visit our website, the Onondaga County Human Rights Commission's website. We're at www.ongov.net/human-rights/. We invite you to that page and explore it, check it out, and be informed. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Commissioner and Attorney Lanessa Chaplin.
Thank you, Montanette, and thank everyone for coming out today. My hope is to do a comprehensive presentation on the Interstate I-81 project, and then also open it up for any kind of questions you may have, or if we want to, get into like the nuts and bolts of the actual DEIS report, we can do that as well. I always tend to think that it's very important to start off with like the historical context of the interstate, because I think if you don't do a good job at kind of framing what the issue is in historical context, then you might look at this project simply as like a construction project, and it's a lot deeper than that. So I'm going to take this moment to hopefully successfully share my screen.
Yes, you are able to share your screen.
So before we get too deep into the PowerPoint presentation, like I mentioned, I think it's really important that we really talk about this from a historical context. And this historical context, I should just point out, is not unique to Syracuse, but it does include Syracuse. There was a national wide initiative. It was called the Mass Transit Movement in the late 1950s and early 1960s, where our national federal government wanted to make sure that people could access from corner to corner of the United States via truck or vehicle. And so as a part of that initiative, what the federal government did is they paid up to 90% of construction costs, and communities such as Syracuse put in their bids to be able to build their viaducts. Unfortunately, at that time, there was a lot of mixed initiatives. And so, for example, Robert Moses, who was our New York State city planner at the time, he really thought this would be a good way to kind of rid the community of slums and rid the community of blighted neighborhoods. This just didn't happen in New York State. This actually happened nationwide. It's well documented that majority of the communities that were raised and dismantled during the mass transit movement were Black and brown communities that were redlined from previous racist practices and or considered blighted because they didn't qualify for certain equity and homeowner loans. And so I just kind of want to frame it around, this is what we're dealing when we're talking about the removal of Interstate I-81 and how it actually impacts what we're here to talk about today is like civil liberties, civil rights, and our basic human rights. So this term has been coined now, 50 years later, as environmental racism. And what environmental racism essentially is I'm not going to read this to you because I know everyone can read. It's essentially the deliberate and targeted placement of either toxics or major roadways in Black and brown communities. This is a federal and state regulation, so we're really talking about either lax land use plans, for example, in communities that you'll find majority Black or brown communities, very similar to Syracuse. It's happening here. Our communities are usually zoned for residential plus light industry. And so that type of zoning sets us up to be able to have major toxins in our community, where other zoning areas would be just like strictly residential or strictly commercial use. Black and brown communities are typically residential with light industry, and that's what we have kind of coined this term environmental racism. And just to kind of give you a kind of heads up about what we're going to be talking about here, it's nothing new, and race is the most significant predictor of a person living in a contaminated area. Now, why this slide is important to point out before we get to the I-81 viaduct, because this goes across income brackets. And so there's this kind of assumption that they tend to place major toxins in communities of low income. That's simply not the case. They place these major toxins in middle class, upper class, and lower class Black communities. So that's what we're kind of talking about here with environmental racism, as to why do we have a viaduct in the middle of a residential community? How did that even come to be? Because I think in my lifetime and others, we have always lived with the highway there. So we haven't really given it much thought about how did it get there? And so I'm really trying to describe how this got here, not only in Syracuse, but really just impacts us nationally. And I do think that it's starting to gain some momentum since the Biden administration has taken office, where they really highlighted how transportation projects had dismantled and disrupted Black communities in the 1950s and 60s. So the few things I want to highlight here, how did we get here? Well, redlining is what placed 90% of the Black population in the 15th ward. That's exactly where the viaduct sits now. And so redlining was a practice where they made sure that Black people lived in one central area in their city. For us, it was downtown Syracuse. For other cities, it may have been different. And so what happened essentially is the Homeowners Loan Corporation, they went to 236 cities across our nation, and they lined those communities. And so if you lived in a green line community, that means you were a white community, high income community. If you lived in a yellow line community, that means you were low income, middle income, white community. Red line communities were specifically held for the purpose of Black and brown communities, and it did not go by income. So income was irrelevant. So if you were a Black community, you were automatically a red line community. And why this is what's detrimental to the Black community and the brown communities, because if you were in a red line community, you didn't qualify for home loans, you didn't qualify for equity loans, you didn't qualify for a business loan, regardless of your income. And that's the kind of the point I like to stress there, because we have a really rich history in Syracuse. We had the first Black teacher, we had the first Black police officer, we even had the first African-American lawyer ever to be licensed in New York State working right here in Syracuse. And they lived in the 15th Ward, although they could have afforded to live in any other district in our city, they just couldn't because of these practices. These practices were upheld by real estate organizations, the federal government. And basically what it said was, it wasn't even good enough to have just a white community. You had to have in your covenant, in your deeds, that you would not sell your house to a Black owner. So in order to be green lined, you had to essentially be a white community that can guarantee it would remain white. And so I think that's a really important part of the history that we need to kind of parse out when we talk about why do we even have a viaduct there. But I think a lot of people kind of assume, well, it's always been there, it's for the benefit of all. But really some folks more than others paid the price for that highway. And we talked about the mass transit movement in detail and kind of what that really entailed. And then the urban housing renewal, which we know the DOJ, which is the Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit, recently did a study on Syracuse, and they determined that through urban renewal and the mass transit movement, the city of Syracuse Black community lost 101 acres of land. And so I'm really trying to set the stage up here to why this is the human rights issue, why this is the civil rights issue, because all of these atrocities happened just merely 60 years ago. We're not taught these things in like elementary school or grade school, so we don't really know unless we do our own independent research. So there were several factors that, and we see that in this community still, where the viaduct sits, that has the steam plant, and it has brownfields, and has a ton of other toxins in that community. And here are just some of the reasons why people justify environmental racism. So just roughly, we know that steam at Dr. King is right next to the viaduct. And just to give you a little bit of context, the EPA since 2011 is the earliest that we could find. They have been warning states across our country to not place major roadways within 600 or 500 feet in front of a major roadway. And the reason is because it's disproportionately affecting children, and children are not the same as adults. And so children are not many adults. So what their exposure to overpollution would be against like an average adult is much, much different. And so this has been well researched that if you go to school within 500 or 600 feet of a major roadway as a school-aged child, your likelihood of having permanent developmental disabilities, that means lower IQ scores, performing worse on tests, lower cognitive thinking skills, which is like our comprehensive reading and also our decision-making skills, along with physical attributes, I mean higher rates of asthma, higher rates of ADHD, all those things that we kind of see present in that community have been correlated to being in close proximity to major roadways. And so for a very long time, the EPA has been recommending that we not do that practice. And so now we're in a place where we're going to be actually taking the viaduct down. So it's a good time to address how we can resolve some of those issues when it comes to impacting schools near major roadways. I think it goes without saying that it disproportionately impacts children of color. We just recently put out a study. There are 464 schools currently in New York State that are near major roadways, and 80% of them are Black or Latinx. And then the remaining 20% are low-income communities. And so there's really a disparate impact when we're talking about who's affected by major roadways such as I-81 and school-age children who their academic achievement and their physical achievement is going down. So I'll get a little bit more into the actual nuts and bolts of the I-81 project. And also, please, if you have any questions, like I'm okay with like you chiming in or raising your hand or going through Montanet and just asking a question as we're going along through the slides. Just in case you want to make sure you don't forget it. I have a slide presentation here, so I won't forget where I'm at, but so feel free to interrupt me if need be. So something that I just want to talk a little bit about the I-81 project. And so when you're thinking about the I-81 project, they are required by law to do a couple things. The first thing they have to do is abide by a law called NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. Now, you hear the word environmental, so I don't want you to automatically think trees and birds and bees. Environmental actually means social, economic, and character of neighborhood. So all of those things are included in the environmental impact. It's designed to make sure that humans and nature can live together cohesively. And so they are required to say, how is this project going to impact the economy? How is this project going to impact the character of the community that we're going to be in? How is this project going to impact the people who live there? And then they're also required to do the traditional environmental stuff, like how it's going to, impact the endangered birds or whatever else is going on in that community. And so through that process, they're required to have a set of public hearings. And so you may have heard a lot about these public hearings that DOT is having. It's because they're required to by law. So they're supposed to, by law, create a plan, put that plan out to the community, have a set of public hearings to allow the public to be able to weigh in on what they're proposing. The community is always the best place to start because we know what we want in our community. So it's really important that we show up to those public hearings. One, if we don't show up, then we're not putting them on notice that we have an issue. So the very first thing you want to think about is why would I waste my time, or why would I want to go to a public hearing? Because at the very least, they have to know you have an issue if you want to actually get something done about it. So the public hearing is a time where you express your concerns. You can do that either through calling them directly, emailing them, or showing up to a public hearing. At any point in time, they're all equally the same. So if you don't want to leave your house, you can shoot them an email. If you want to call them, call them. If you want to show up to a public hearing and speak on the mic, then you can do that too, but just make sure you're getting involved. I have a video here. I think I'll skip it because it's like 2 minutes. I'll skip that. So what were the impacts of the original build? You'll see the before picture, the before gray picture. Hopefully you can see that it was a very residential community, high density community. It was very, very populated. 90% of the Black people in Syracuse lived in that one area that you see marked off in the red. And then there is the after effect. So then you can see how detrimental this was to the Black community. And you'll see all those buildings that we recognize every day, and you may not have any idea that at some point they were homeowners, and they were Black homeowners who resided there that are no longer there. And I think worth pointing out in that diagram to the right is there's 22 parking lots there. So you take that as you will. So let's talk a little bit about what the DOT has concluded as a part of their analysis that they have been working on for 10 years. I want to give a caveat that we have seen the preliminary draft environmental impact statement. However, the draft environmental impact statement should be coming out this summer. So all of this information is based on their most recent draft that they put out publicly, which was summer of 2019. So the most detrimental, in our opinion, the most detrimental conclusion that the DOT has drawn is that the community will not be impacted by construction. And so why is that detrimental? They've done their research, they looked at the footprint, and they said, we can do this project without impacting anyone as a result of it. That conclusion means that they're not obligated to avoid, lessen, or mitigate any consequences to the construction project. That's why it's detrimental, right? Because once they recognize, wait, we might impact this community, then they're required to look at mitigation strategies, right? And so you all may have heard, or maybe you have not heard of what mitigation is. So mitigation is typically either you're going to lessen the harm by creating some safety buffers or moving people out the neighborhood. You're going to avoid the harm by not doing it at all, right? And thinking about a different plan, or you're going to pay money, right? To make sure that the person is adequately compensated for the harm that they're going on. So that's what mitigation means when we're talking about. The DOT has determined that this community will not be impacted. If you're not familiar with the community that we're talking about, hopefully you are. It's a highly residential neighborhood. There are over 3,000 families that live there, and some apartments are 3 feet away from the viaduct, 7 feet away from the viaduct, 10 feet away from the viaduct. Very, very close proximity to the project. The school is less than 500 feet away from the viaduct, and many, many other homeowners are really, really close to the viaduct. So that kind of conclusion raises a really red flag to say, well, how did you come to that conclusion? This is just a little fancy chart I'd like to show you. Everything in that red area is within 500 feet of the viaduct. That little blue dot, to give you a frame of reference, that's STEAM at Dr. King. So everything in that area, according to the CDC and the EPA, are in the impacted zone of construction. So why do we come to the conclusion that the DOT's conclusion is faulty? Well, first, they failed to conduct a health and safety assessment. So what does that mean, a health and safety assessment? What that means is this community has been designated by the Federal Highway Administration and by the New York State Department of Transportation to be an environmentally justice community. So what does environmentally justice community mean? It's just a fancy word to say what we mentioned before. This community has been impacted by environmental racism. We know that they are already overburdened with toxins and pollutants. It's a predominantly Black community, and it's a low-income community. So what the federal government did back in 1970, after our project has already happened, what they did was they said, if you live in a community that's marginalized, you are now going to be designated as an environmental justice community. And moving forward, whenever there's a project in your community, there's a heightened level of scrutiny that the DOT and the Federal Highway Administration are going to have to undertake. And so what we're saying is, because this community has lived in a neighborhood for 57 years that has been overexposed to air pollution and overexposed to noise pollution, you have to do an in-depth assessment to get a picture or a snapshot of what the health needs are in this community. For example, the DOT should be able to say, 4 feet away from the viaduct lives a resident who has COPD respiratory disease. And are they, that individual person, are they going to be able to handle 7 years of construction? And if the answer is no, then they should be offering up some relocation plan, right? So we're saying you need to do an in-depth safety and health and assessment on this specific community. It's not enough to do the general assessment that you would do in a regular, well-resourced, underburdened community, but you need to do something additional here. The second point where we say there's going to be an impact is they fail to consider future land use. And so what does that mean? So under NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, they are required to consider how their construction project will impact the future land use for the community that lives there. And so what we know is the preferred option is the community grid. So then we have to ask ourselves, how is that 18 acres of land going to be used to make sure that the community that currently lives there isn't priced out through either inflated rents or new development or higher property taxes? Like, what are some of the safety measures we can put in place to make sure that the community and the character of the community remain the same? And the third way we're saying that their conclusion is faulty is they fail to provide general oversight. And so what does that look like? So what that looks like now is how they operate mostly all of their other projects, meaning they're going to bid out to contractors, and then the contractors are going to be responsible for following the rules that were set by the DOT. What we're saying is, because this project is happening in such a vulnerable population of people, such a vulnerable community, the federal, the state government needs to be making sure that the construction companies are abiding by the rules set forward. So we're saying that they should be doing some general oversight, and leaving it up to them to decide what that looks like. So we talked about displacement, we talked about access to opportunity, and one thing I will mention here is some of our coalition partners have been working really hard on making sure that the residents who live in this community, Syracuse City residents, specifically residents who live in the footprint, have access to jobs on this project, right? Because they're the ones that are going to bear the burden of the project. They should also be able to see some benefits from the project. So that's it for me, and I will open it up for questions and any kind of comments or additional feedback.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Chaplin. Now we want to open up the floor to community members. You can submit a question in our chat box, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. I'm going to have Commissioner Hernandez assist me in this. And we are ready to take any statements. We want to listen to you, community members. Is there anyone who has a question? Okay, so at this moment, is there any information? I know what we can do. We can speak a little bit about, can we hear from the county's perspective on this particular project? I know that Commissioner Chaplin mentioned the economic part of this. Does anyone have any questions about the economic portion of this project? So we have a question from Mr. King. And the question is, can we discuss how the cumulative impacts idea functions in a NEPA project, NEPA project?
So that's a really good question. And I think it goes to, so essentially NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. I'll just keep saying it because I don't like to use acronyms. People may not memorize what those acronyms are. So essentially the National Environmental Policy Act requires right now that when you're doing a project, look at the cumulative impacts. And what that means is basically your past, present, and your future impacts of the project. And that's really what this whole conversation is about, right? We're really harping on looking at the past impact of the original construction. So we know that it devastated a community of color, specifically a Black community. What are the present conditions of this community? And so we know as a result of the mass transit movement, so as a result of the building of I-81, in addition to urban renewal, Syracuse, New York has one of the highest wealth gaps in our country. We have some of the highest, we have the highest in New York, one of the highest in the country, segregated school district borders. And we're also struggling with concentrations of poverty, right? And then in the Black community, we have the highest rates of asthma in our county. So we have those figures and we kind of can correlate why those figures exist, right? If you have, and also we were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 in those same zip codes, right? And so a lot of it has to now go to, this is not an individual person's lifestyle or individual person's behavior. There is a systematic issue here, right? And so what we know is what we call it in the environmental justice world, like the invisible threats. We know that they are overexposed to air pollution. We know that they are overexposed to noise pollution. We know they are overexposed to lead. So you have these major toxins in our Black communities that are contributing to their overall lack of well-being. So we have to think about the cumulative impact of those things and making sure that the DOT is responsible for addressing those things. For example, we are asking the DOT to do a lead analysis, right? So we know that when they take the viaduct down, lead is in the viaduct, so it will now be in the air. So it's not enough to say that the lead that will be released from the construction is under the federal regulations. So that's fine, that's great, that's dandy. We need to be asking, how is that lead that's going to be released into the air, when joined with the existing lead problem, how are the accumulation of those two going to impact an individual? So that's when we talk about cumulative impacts. Or we know that when the viaduct comes down, there's going to be certain air and debris that come up into the air. So that's all fine. So maybe it might be under the federal regulations, but how is it going to exist with the current air pollution and the current health and respiratory needs of that community? So that's what we talk about when we say cumulative impacts. Like, it's not enough just to say we're going to stay under the federal regulation guidelines. We have to consider what's already in that community and the density that's in that community. As an example, we know that that community has been identified as one of the lead hotspots. So what does that mean? 1 in every 6 children have experienced lead poisoning. That's astronomical. I mean, even on a national level, that is astronomical. So even the slightest bit of lead that's exposed, we need to think about. And maybe it may call for a relocation plan, right? Maybe it may call for more abatement to make sure that they're not being exposed. But what I don't want to happen in this conversation is, as we're critiquing parts of the plan for the DOT, to be misconstrued that the viaduct must come down, right? That's the overall consensus of, you need to rid this community of the massive amount of air pollution that they're being exposed to. One of the ways you rid that is you remove the viaduct. And why it's beneficial is because 70% of the interstate traffic that is currently going through that community will now no longer go through that community. So we're talking about the big diesel trucks. We're talking about the trailers, all the things that exude diesel, right? Not just fuel, but diesel. Those things will be rerouted to the more appropriate highway, which is 41, that already has mechanisms in place to absorb air pollution. The thing about air pollution is, if you have enough vegetation and enough footage, it automatically absorbs into zero. So your risk goes from 100% to zero. And so 481 was designed to be that interstate because it's lined with trees on both sides to absorb that air pollution, and homes are not within 500 feet of those major roadways. So it's perfect for this, and it kind of eliminates the overburden of air pollution this community is facing. So I want to critique the DOT's plan and say that there is a human rights violation here, but also recognizing that we're not critiquing the removal of the.
Thank you, Anessa. We do have one other question in the chat area. It's from Human Rights Commissioner John Rushing. I would like to know if the state, county, city have plans to reinvest in the communities surrounding the highway. A lot of land bank houses surrounding the highway. So I believe there should be expressed intent to give those communities the opportunity to own homes, something that was restricted on purpose. Your thoughts or comments?
I think that's a really good comment, and like right on par. It reminds me that I should probably attach the link to Building Better Futures, the report that NYCLU wrote. Essentially for that very reason, we are recommending that there's going to be almost 18 acres of land that becomes available as a result of the construction. And we are recommending that the 8 acres that sits just west of MLK Boulevard be returned back to the community in the form of a community land trust, to give them the opportunity to decide what they would like to do with the land. Do they want to build small developments, mixed use, low density mom and pop shops, or do they want to build residential housing? It's a way for the community to build back some of the equity that they lost just 57 years ago. So I think you're right on par. I think we're all thinking the same. The logistics of how to make that happen are yet to be known. It's going to obviously require city and county partnerships, along with private and public partnerships. And so that's the heavy lift, but like at least getting the ask out there and letting them start to analyze if that's a possibility is the first step.
Thank you again, Vanessa. So the one question that we have from Shannon regarding employment on the project, that aspect of the I-81 project is being discussed. It's a process. We don't have any information at this time. We will have more information moving forward. That's information we can get back to you on, Shannon. Make sure you leave contact information so we can follow up with you. So next we have a question from CRBN, and he wants to know, so we want the viaduct to come down, but it must come down in the right way that protects the residents. And Commissioner Chaplin has put a link into the chat box for everyone to access. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? This is your opportunity to ask any questions associated with the I-81 project.
I think Shannon wanted to unmute, Monette.
So I need to have her submit a more specific question, and we can follow up with her about any employment questions that she has. Shannon, do you have a question other than an employment question? And I need to have you, can we see your face? So Shannon, you should be able to unmute and speak. Are you able to do that? There you go.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry. I'm on my phone and it's not really working very well. I didn't mean to be so vague.
Okay.
It just wasn't letting me type.
Did you hear where I said that we'll follow up with any kind of employment questions that you might have? We'll need contact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. My question was basically, DOT talks a lot about employment regarding construction, and my question was if there was more conversation about employment regarding decision-making on the project from aspects beyond just construction. So that was basically my question, a little more focused. Thank you.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
a great question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Montanette.
No, I defer to you.
That's a great question. And so here's the I guess the best way to put this is anyone beyond the employees of the New York State Department of Transportation do not have decision-making power, right? So this is their report. And so the DEIS, which is the draft environmental impact statement, which they're required to do, is really like the layout of the best plan that they have concluded. So they present that to the community, and it's really on us, right? And not saying I agree with the system, but that's just the system that we have. It's really on the community to push back on what they have concluded as the best plan. We are, like I said, we are in the best position to do that because we're in the community. So we know, right? We live here, we work here, we play here. So we can push back on that decision making. But ultimately, when they issue their record of decision, the decision makers are just the people who will work for it and are employed for the DOT. So I hope that answers your question. I know it's not the best answer, but that's just what the system that we exist in.
I can say a bit about employment if you like, but
The only other thing I'll add to that, Shannon, is they are required by law to consider the comments that are submitted by the public. And the term considered legally has meant they have to take a hard look at what we're recommending. So the idea is if we raise these civil rights issues in a big enough or loud enough way, then the justification now has to fall on them to say, we understand that this whole community wants this one thing. Now we have to explain why we can't do it. And so really the burden shifts once we start submitting our own comments through the way that we talked before, either through phone, email, or showing up at a public hearing. The burden then shifts to them having to say, how come they can't do it? And so that's really the importance of submitting a public comment and being involved in the process.
Thank you, Mr. King, for your question, and thank you, Vanessa. Are there any further questions? Any comments or statements? This is a listening session for human rights commissioners, and we do want to hear from the community. So we open the floor and give you this opportunity to share your thoughts about I-81. What you want to see happen, what should be different. This is an opportunity for you to share or involve your input in this process, in this project.
I suppose I could add a point. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can, Mr. Haley.
Thank you. I appreciate your listening session, and I think some excellent points have been made here. Many of us have been working on this for a long time. What Vanessa Chapman has just mentioned is really extremely important, which is if we get a consensus from the community input towards what we want for the future, which we're trying to understand, then it's very important to simplify that message to one or two clear points and get as much of the community around it, which would include your office and your ability to support some of those consensus after you've vetted them and looked at them and find they do represent the community, is then to have that all lifted to the DOT to raise the importance of the comments from the public. One of the biggest problems of the citizen input side is to get numbers, number one, and get consensus. There's been an education process by so many different individual groups in this community dealing with so many aspects of this project that are about to be our primarily last chance to address these issues in the planning stage is just around the corner. So I think the whole community must do all it can possibly do to get behind these simplified issues to help whatever the issues are the community wants to address with the DOT. This is the time. Thank you.
if I could make a brief comment. Okay, it's regarding, I think there's a lot about the National Environmental Protection Act, which might not be apparent, but can be we can refer to and tap, and cumulative impacts is one example of that, where it is actually in the design of the act to take in account, and this began with ecological things, so they but constructed that around ecological impacts, but then they realized that it applies to social also, and this is all on the white, you can link to the White House website, has information about this if you want more, so that it's a valid idea. It's just that not a lot of projects might directly tap this, but it is in the, I think, as far as I understand, the construction of the act. And so there are things that we can ask for, which once having enough people ask for them, they have to respond.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Is there anyone else who has a comment or a statement? Any questions? We have a question from Monica. Do we know when the state is holding their next public hearing?
So we don't have a definitive answer. What we do know is through the rumblings of conversations, we anticipate that they're going to be releasing the actual draft environmental impact statement sometime in June. If that is the case, they are required to hold two public hearings within 30 days. And so we anticipate the public hearing will be in July or August. I think just as, a first line of kind of advocacy, this group and others could be asking for an extension on the public comment period. Just to give you kind of a reference, the first preliminary draft was thousands of pages long, and it received over 1,800 submitted comments, and is still ongoing. And so I'm just going to anticipate, we should all anticipate that this next draft will be thousands of pages long. So it's going to take some time, especially for community members and community organizations, to read through the document enough to be able to then spread that information educationally. So I think the first order of business would be to ask them to extend the public comment period. But to answer your direct question, I would say July or August, we should be on the lookout for a public hearing.
All right, thank you. Are there any other? Our commission will be having a follow-up session to this particular public meeting. Lanessa, is there anything we can do between now and then as a means to be part of this process of the I-81 project?
Yeah, I would recommend emailing the DOT and submitting comments. If you have any questions or concerns, now is the time to submit them. You don't want to wait till the public hearing because, like I said, it's such a short amount of time that you have to advocate for what you want. And I can put a link in the chat that will send you directly to their page and also to the NYCLU page that also is submitting comments on folks' behalf. So I'll put the links in those right.
Okay, thank you. Also, CRBN has a question, but I'm not clear on what your question is. I'm going to unmute you or ask you to unmute. And if you could just expound a little bit on your question.
Yes, we talk about the community coming together and working on this, but what I see is a lot of separate groups working kind of side by side. And I think it would be much more effective if we can figure out a way to all work together. And it was a rhetorical question more than anything else. How do we work together to define what it is that we want the state or the city or the county to do to make I-81 the transformation that we want it to become? I'm done.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that comment. As I said, we will be hosting future hearings around I-81, and that's going to be an opportunity to learn more from all the stakeholders involved in I-81, which is community members. And in the meantime, the advice that Commissioner Lanessa Chaplin has given us is good to act on. Are there any other questions? Any comments or statements that you'd like to make, community members? So there's a
If I could just put
screenshot.
a plug- Oh, sorry, yeah. If
Yeah,
I could
can
just
you-
put
can
a
you-
plug. If I could just put a plug in, the NYCOU is we are back out into the public now. So we're doing outside events every Saturday for the rest of May and June in the anticipation of the report coming out. So our first Saturday, which is going to be this Saturday, we're going to have an outdoor event at the Faith Hope Center. We'll have hot dogs, hamburgers, music, but then we'll also have some talking and some call to actions. So if you want to come or you want to invite people, I only could attach the screenshot for some reason. It wouldn't let me attach the PDF.
Great, we have it. Thank you. I want to ask again, community members. Community members, are there any other questions or comments, statements you'd like to make? And then I want to ask any of our commissioners if they will have words or if there are any questions and comments from our commissioners. Anyone? I see Commissioner Rushing has his hand up. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, everybody. I would just wanted to comment and thank everyone in attendance for attending this meeting. I want to thank Commissioner Lanessa for such a beautiful presentation in the beginning. I really do agree with you that the history of that edifice needs to be addressed in order for us to be able to move forward in a more productive future. And that's why I asked the questions that I asked previously in regards to what is going to be these municipalities' dedication to reinvigorating the neighborhoods that were decimated for that project. So thank you again for everybody for attending. I look forward to our meetings in the future. Stay well and stay masked. I don't care what nobody says.
Thank you, Montague.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm sorry, someone has a question or hand up?
No, it's Rashida. Hi,
Commissioner
hi
Chair, go ahead.
everyone. I just wanted to for tuning in. Lanessa, you did an amazing job. On behalf of the Human Rights Commission, I am the chair. I am so thankful for everyone that logged on today. And this is just one of many listening sessions we will do for the community. We will have Lanessa back again. Please spread the word. This is what we have to do as a community. So what's going on. We will have more listening sessions. We will bring on other projects that are going on in that area so that you can learn the facts. But on behalf of the Human Rights Commission, I want to thank everyone. And I want to thank Lanessa for doing.
We missed a little bit of what you were saying, Commissioner Chair. Commission Chair Rashida, can you say that again?
With my internet. Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone for logging on today. And as the Human Rights Commission, I was just speaking up for everyone, saying thank you for logging on and thanking Lanessa Chaplin for doing an amazing job. And this is just sessions we will do for the community. This is what we're about. This is what the human rights is about. We're about making sure our community is educated. An amazing team, and I just want to thank everyone for listening today.
Thank you, Commission Chair Rashida. And if there's anyone else who wants to make any comments, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up and end this session. And again, we'll be doing this again. We're going to be here, part of this process of I-81. We will also be taking on other issues as well. So it's going to be a process of talking, listening, and sharing. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Mr. King.
Okay, just briefly, what we've discussed today as the policy actor is DOT. But as a lot of people did mention also, local governments are going to play a huge part in this, and something that impacts so much of the community is a planning issue, is a governance issue, and so it becomes very political, and people shouldn't be afraid to realize that and make some serious asks about this project, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. King. That's part of our vision, part of our goal, to get into the community and have the community stakeholders speak up. We want to give them a seat at the table, give them the microphone, and make their asks known. I see Chief Diversity Officer Monica Williams wants to speak, so I'm going to mute.
I just want to say thank you, Lanessa, for this beautiful presentation that you have done. I think that as long as we've been talking about this, I think there's still a lot of people in our community that don't really understand what is happening. And I just want to say that you do a phenomenal job at explaining it. And, you know, I think that any help that my office can give you on getting the word out, we will be more than happy to do that. I also like to say I am very proud of this commission. I think you all are doing a phenomenal job on keeping the community updated with information as to what is happening in our community. Sometimes people think that because, you know, we're on social media and all that, everybody knows what's going on. And that's just not the case, as we see. Lanessa has been, I can just sing her praises because she's really been out there. When I talk about boots on the ground, Lanessa has been knocking on doors, trying to get the community to understand how this is going to impact them. And, you know, if you know of anyone who lives in that area who may be impacted by it, and you don't feel comfortable having that conversation, please have them reach out to Lanessa or give Lanessa their information. Because like I said, to me, she's the champion of getting this information out in our communities, and she's been doing this for a long time. And Lanessa, I just want to say thank you because, you know, sometimes I think you don't get enough thanks for the work that you're doing, and literally, you are like boots on the ground. You're knocking on those doors. You're just not in one specific station. You're like everywhere. You know, you're knocking on those doors. And I remember being in a meeting with you at the Elks Lodge and just watching you give that presentation and the questions coming back and how you articulated the information. Even I went out, you know, understanding more about this project and learning more things. So again, I just want to say thank you, and thank you all. You all are doing a phenomenal job, and I don't never want to be remiss without saying that to you all, because, you know, you don't get paid to do this work, and you do it because you love your community. And, you know, and I never want not take an opportunity to thank you all. So again, thank you.
I gotta, first, I can't accept, y'all know I can't take compliments, so please stop. I don't like them. I'm uncomfortable. I want to hide. Because myself, I feel like I never do enough work, so that's that pressure on me. But I just want to take this moment. First of all, we have an amazing chair, Rashida, who is like killing the game, and she's really gonna like keep us on task and make sure that we're doing what we have to be doing. She's super passionate about this. And also, Monica, you have had your boots on the ground, Chief Diversity Officer, with like getting this group together. And so like, I am amazed and so proud of the group that you got together to work on this commission. And I think I mentioned it yesterday to Montanette, like you put a really great group of people together. I'm proud to be on the board with these people, and just the diversity and representation is amazing and astounding. And I'm just looking forward to all the work that we can do. So thank you for putting us together and doing all that hard work that you did and recruiting people to be on this commission. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. And I too must say I appreciate you greatly, Commissioner Chaplin. We have a hand raised for Human Rights Commissioner Agnes McCrae. We've had a few other local elected officials join us, and I will recognize them after we've heard from Commissioner McCrae. So you can go forward.
Yes, I just wanted to echo Rashida. Great job. Fantastic. And my comment is progress, community, and health has to be able to go together. It's all together, and we can't have progress and benefits within our community without considering all aspects. It doesn't matter where we are. It just matters that we grow our community in the best way we can for all. And how we do that is doing it together, because human rights is where we start from. Because connected, all of us on this call are human beings, regardless of where we are on certain issues. And in order to do the best we can for our community now and in the future, it has to start with all of us. So we hope that we continue to hear your voices and concerns, because we are here together with our community and with our businesses as we progress and go forward, not just for now, but for all the tomorrows. Because whether we're sitting or standing or the lights are on and off, the Syracuse community is still a, a, a business of fortitude, commitment to all its citizens. And we owe that to each other and one another. And let's work together not only to bring the problems forth, but to be part of the solution, because that's secure rights for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner McCrae. We appreciate those comments very much. I want to acknowledge DeWitt Town Board member Karen Whitney has joined us, and also County Legislator Linda Irvin. As I understand, Legislator Irvin does not want to speak or doesn't have words at this time, or doesn't want to have words. And I am not certain about Karen Whitney, but I want to acknowledge that they are here with us. Are there any more questions regarding the I-81 project or comments? Okay. Well, if there are no further comments, statements, questions, and remember, you can follow up with the Human Rights Commission at our office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and you can email me any questions or comments or any concerns you might have regarding I-81, and it's something that the Human Rights Commission can take up Other than that, I would look forward to our next one. I would invite the community members to keep their eyes peeled for our next hearing. And as I said, this is going to be one of a few hearings on I-81. We do plan to hold other public hearings that will deal with some of the salient issues that are happening in our community. So we are here, we're present, we're working, we are in the community. We invite you to join our meetings. We meet once a month. Visit our website. You can get all the information you need as it relates to the Human Rights Commission. We thank everyone for being here. We value our community, and we value the community members. We value the public, and we want to get feedback from you, from the community. So having said all that, if there's nothing further, we will end this session, and we will keep everyone posted of our next meeting, our next public meeting. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to Chief Diversity Officer Monica Williams, Commission Chair Rashida Caldwell, and also Project Counsel for NYCLU, the New York Civil Liberties Union, and Human Rights Commissioner Lanessa Chaplin. Thank you for all the commissioners who were able to join today. Thank you all elected officials who are here, and all of the community members. We thank the media for being here as well. We want to get the word out about I-81 and get everyone involved. We're here to be a megaphone, an amplification for what's going on in our community. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Keep your eyes open for our next meeting, and we will see everyone soon.